Well, this is True News. I'm Doc Burkhart, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Godcast. Thanksgiving Day 2019. We're so glad that you've tuned in to this edition of True News. Well, here it is, Thanksgiving Day 2019. I hope you're having the opportunity to spend some time with your family. I also hope that you are thankful for the many blessings that God has provided for you in your life, that you are constantly thankful. God acknowledges the thankful. And so I encourage you today, if you haven't taken time out of your day to let the Lord know how thankful you are for the family that you have, the career that you have, the job that you have, the nation that you live in, take some time out right now and just acknowledge Him as the source of all good things in your life. Well, while many are on break today and they are enjoying time with family or traveling, whatever that case might be, we're here today in order to get you another edition of the Godcast. We've got a very special one today that we want to share with you. About a few weeks ago, we came across a young lady that had a dramatic change in her life as an encounter of a trip that she recently took to the Middle East. Edward Zoll is here to tell us a little bit more about this special young lady and the conversation that he recently had with her. Edward, who are we going to be hearing from today?
We're going to be hearing from a former talk radio host, now online commentator, named Kim Iversen. And as you noted, she took a special trip recently to the Middle East, specifically to Palestine. She basically went to the West Bank, went to Ramallah. She wanted to see firsthand what's actually happening to the Palestinian people and challenge some of her preconceived notions that she's been taught, not just by the media, but by her friends, family, political figures, religious figures. She wanted to see these things for herself. And she went into it with one opinion, being maybe a more Zionist related opinion on what was happening in the region. Right. She left it with a completely new outlook. And Doug, I think this interview, more so than anything, represents that there is a political awakening happening on the subject of Zionists wanting to create the Greater Israel project, the Oded Yanan plan, and even going back further to the beginning of the 1900s, the consistent conquest crusade to create a region from the Nile all the way to the Euphrates for the Zionist state.
Now, just so we're clear, that she came into this with an understanding really more of a pro-Israel position as far as the encounters that she expected on her visit to the West Bank in particular. So that's what she's starting off with here, right?
Yes, and in addition to that, Doc, I think something we've really explained greatly this year, especially us coming out as right-wing, left-wingers. Yes. You know, the term we use this really to present to the public that the right-left divide in this country, it's a paper tiger. It's a ploy to use to basically deceive the public into accepting the age-old propaganda by the political and religious class. And this interview represents us breaking through that. No, she is not a conservative, a Christian, a Republican. She's just someone who sees an injustice, sees corruption for what it is. And I think it's a lesson to all of us that for us to confront this and address it, it's bipartisan when it is in conjunction with lies and corruption.
Now, several years ago, Edward, Rick, and I had the opportunity to go to the West Bank, go to Bethlehem in particular, and that was a life-changing event for us as well. Opened our eyes to a lot of different things that were going on, especially within the city of Bethlehem itself, especially how Christians there were treated, and it gave us a whole new perspective on things, and likewise for Kim Iversen as well. Well, we're going to get right into this interview today. Edward had the opportunity to speak to Kim Iversen. Let's watch this interview here, Thanksgiving Day 2019.
With this True News Special Report, I'm Edward Zoll. The political polarization of American society, to some, has turned the Western democratic process into a powder keg of war and fury. Different from the storming of beaches and detonations of weapons of unimaginable destruction, this war has filtered down to the dinner table, pitting mother against daughter, father against son, and brothers and neighbors as ideological enemies in a poisonous struggle for king of a bankrupt Capitol Hill. What was once envisioned to be a peaceful revolution every few years has now mutated into a battle of scarlet letters, with each side seeking the public humiliation of each other's champions. And the result, presidents, congressmen, and senators who all seem to mirror the foreign policies of their predecessors, neglecting the interests of their domestic constituents in lieu of service to a hidden hand. Some have referred to this corrupt and entrapping complex as the false left-right paradigm, and many blame its growth and weaponization on the inception of 24/7 opinion news through television and now social media. But for former Council on Foreign Relations archivist Carol Quigley, it began well before the digital revolution, and is no accident, but rather by design, to divide, deceive, and conquer public opinion and maintain a status quo for the few at the expense of the many. In his famous book, Tragedy and Hope, that has shaped the minds of U.S. presidents like Bill Clinton, Carol Quigley defended the existence and necessity of the false left-right paradigm, writing that the argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to the doctrinaire, a person who seeks to impose a doctrine without regard to practical considerations and academic thinkers. Mr. Quigley ended by advising that instead the two parties should be almost identical, so the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extreme shifts in policy. Sound familiar? Well, we're going to break that false left-right paradigm today and invite onto the program someone the controlled media would have you believe is my ideological enemy. My guest today is a lesson in bipartisan humanity. The truth is, the average informed person has far more in common with each other than we've been indoctrinated to believe. And one topic Washington's eternal political party has sought tirelessly to ensure division in, other than war, of course, is the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, specifically the inhumane treatment of Palestinian men, women, and children for almost a century, as they live in third world conditions under military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Kim Iversen is a veteran talk radio host and newscaster with a decade of experience in radio, TV, and now new media, and currently hosts the Kim Iversen Show, and has just returned from a trip to Palestine, where she not only saw the conditions of the Palestinian people firsthand, but had a life-changing experience which shifted her beliefs about the crisis. Welcome to Trunews, Ms. Iversen, and thank you again for agreeing to share your story with our audience.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with what you used to believe and what changed.
Well, I'm not sure. I think for me, what I used to believe was I wasn't really sure if, I remained fairly neutral about the conflict, and I wasn't really sure if people were exaggerating or if people were being really truly honest about what was going on. I'd heard the plight of the Palestinians and what was going on with them, but a lot of me felt like, well, maybe this is an exaggeration. Maybe there's got to be reasons. I have a lot of Israeli friends and Jewish friends who have strong ties to Israel. And when I would listen to them, they would say, this is like a married couple that got divorced and it's very bitter. And each side has a story. And if you listen to one, then you really believe them and you're like, wow, your ex is awful. And if you listen to the other, it's the same thing. And so, there's these two sides and it's just a really bitter divorce. So I believed that there was probably two sides to this story. So that's, I think, what I believed before I got there.
Well, you heard, obviously, the first side. I think you had one of the sides, at least, before going. Were you shown the other side? It wasn't just obviously the Palestinian side, but what exactly did you see in going on this trip to the West Bank?
Yeah, so this is what's interesting is a lot of people said to me, well, you're only seeing one side, right? Because they were saying, oh, you're only seeing this Palestinian side and you're not seeing the Israeli side. And the truth is that we did venture into Israel. We ventured on the Israeli side of the wall, and you could put earplugs in your ears and not listen to anybody. But if you just tour around the West Bank and then you tour around the Israeli side of the wall, the stories tell themselves. It is a vast difference between the two, the way that the West Bank, the Palestinians are forced to live versus the way how life is on the Israeli side. Just walking around and seeing everything without even hearing a story, it's appalling.
Well, something that really caught me in the description of your trip, you've posted a video a little bit like a kind of recount. You're planning to publish a documentary style series on what you saw. It made me realize just how little this is talked about in the news, in the network television, but even in digital media, is that the condition of what people have to live in, the lack of water, for example. You mentioned on the other side of the wall, a lot of people don't know, obviously, there's a 300-mile wall that separates the different areas and, of course, the main contingents of the north part with the West Bank. What exactly, and where did you go first? Like on this basically this mission trip, in a sense, to the region?
Yeah, so we toured around everywhere. So we were in Jerusalem to start, and Jerusalem has East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, and East Jerusalem is supposed to be run by the Palestinians. One thing you realize when you're over there is that very little is actually run by the Palestinians, even in the West Bank. So we toured all around the West Bank, going from city to town to, various different cities. So we went to Ramallah, which is where we were based, and stayed every night in Ramallah. And then each day we would get on a shuttle and go to various places. We went to Hebron. We went to the Dead Sea. We went to quite a bit of towns. I mean, we went so many places, but we also went over to Tel Aviv and that side of the wall. But there is a giant 300-mile wall that, it's just this massive wall. You can't escape it. And I think a lot of people are under the misconception that on the West Bank side of the wall, Palestinians control it, and that is absolutely not the case. And even with the water, like you mentioned, the Palestinians have their water only 3 days a week, and there's fresh flowing water for the Israelis 24/7, and that's even in the West Bank side of the wall. So even in the West Bank, the Israeli settlements have fresh flowing water 24/7, and yet neighboring little villages or cities that are right next to them have water only 3 days a week and are forced to store water in giant storage containers that they keep on their roof for the remaining 4 days a week. We went all over the place, really, and saw the wall, a lot of wall, a lot of military.
Well, you mentioned it sounds like an artificial shortage in a sense, obviously, because how could a settlement right next to the home of millions basically have full flowing water 24/7, and obviously the settlement area, the places where the Palestinians live, on the other side of the wall, that they only have it 3 days a week. The fact that the artificial starvation, in a sense, the holding off of a basic human necessity, water.
Right.
It appears, and I believe in your kind of conclusion you came, is that you believe this obviously is a way to pressure Palestinians through attrition to make them leave the region.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you're over there, what you realize is that everything that is being done, they kind of say, oh, this is for security reasons, or they claim that, oh, this is because we haven't come to a peace agreement of some kind. But it becomes very, very clear when you're over there that absolutely everything that is being done to these Palestinian people is to get them to leave. It's to make their lives so miserable and so desperate that they just sit there and they have to ask themselves, why am I doing this? I've got children. I need to better their lives. I need to get out of here. So with the water situation, it is false. Like, the Israelis are controlling the water, so they were able to annex essentially all of the Palestinian water sources. And then they built themselves really excellent infrastructure and desalinization plants and treatment plants for their water. And then the reason why they say the Palestinians don't have fresh flowing access to water 24/7 is their own fault. They say, well, it's because they didn't build the same infrastructure. They don't have our nice technology. It's not our problem, it's theirs. The issue is that when you talk to American organizations that have gone over there to try to help the Palestinians build their water infrastructure, the Israelis are in charge of the permits. So what do the Israelis do? They don't give them the permits. And I spoke to some people from a water organization, a humanitarian NGO that went over there. And they said that they would send Palestinian engineers to go and measure water sources that were going to need to be treated. And the Israeli soldiers would shoot at them because the water source was too close to the wall. And these are just engineers trying to take measurements in order to clean up their water sources. And they're being shot at by the Israelis. Or this American organization would go to the Israeli government and say, we want to get a permit to build a desalinization treatment plant or to fortify wells, or other kind of treatments, and they would just stall, or they would either flat out deny and say security reasons. They never give a real reason. It's always security, or they just would drag their feet, and years go by, and they don't give them the permits. So when the Israelis say, well, it's their own fault, it's like, really, is it? When you're not giving them the permits and you're shooting at them when they're trying to better their water situation.
Well, and what you just described there, it really is a picture of the brutality of this this kind of stalemate. I mean, these are engineers, they're not soldiers, they're not even armed, right? I mean, it's clear that they're there to test basically for the water supply, yet they're getting shot at. I mean, when I read this story, hear this story from you, I think a lot about the presentation of how some Palestinian protesters are women, children, even young children. This year there's been a lot of incidents where young children who have been in a crowd or someone not near the wall, let's say maybe at least 100, 200 meters off of a wall or a fence, have been shot at. And a couple of these instances, it has been found that they were shot out of some kind of weird entertainment on behalf of Israelis,
Yeah. I mean, I will say that the only fear I ever felt being over there, because there is this big demonization of the Arab Palestinian people. Whenever I speak to Israelis or people that are very supportive of this Zionist project, they say, well, these Israeli people are. I mean, the Arab Palestinians, they're violent, and they're bred to be violent. They say that they're born basically violent, which sounds very racist. That they're raised violent by their families and their churches and their communities, and even in their schools. The textbooks for these children are telling them to be violent. And you even see, as you're driving throughout Israel, throughout even the West Bank, there's all these big red signs that say, do not enter, for the Israelis. It's these signs that say, do not enter, your life will be at risk. Like these Palestinian people are going to eat you alive, like they're cannibals or something. So, I mean, there's this big fear mongering. There's this, all these Arab people, they're all violent. And I had such an opposite experience embedding myself with the Palestinian people, eating with them, traveling with them, making friendships with them. They are wonderful people. They're just trying to live their lives, and they don't want their land stolen. I think any one of us would, if soldiers marched into our home today and said, this is ours now, I don't know how we would peacefully say, okay, I guess it's yours. I guess now we have to come to some kind of a peace agreement to work this out. I mean, I don't blame a person who says, no way, I'm going to fight for what's mine. I can't believe you're taking this from me. That's an act of violence in and of itself, So the Israeli soldiers were very intimidating. They guns everywhere. The Palestinian people are unarmed, and you've got these Israeli soldiers that are all over the place with weapons and in your face all the time. I can't count how many times I saw the end of the barrel of a gun. Not necessarily being pointed at me, but you can't help it. They're waving them all over the place. So it is a very intense situation with the soldiers. They're constantly ready to shoot. They look like they're ready. They don't look very relaxed. They're always on guard. And of course, when we see this here in the United States, even when police are feeling hyper, they have anxiety, thinking that they're going into a tense situation, even if it's not actually tense, but they think it is, they become trigger happy. They do
the tempo,
things that
basically. They've set the tone basically for the encounter to maybe be much more violent and ultimately escalate very easily. And I think something you pointed out is very interesting, because it seems to be part of fallacies of the human condition, especially our kind of like our ability to be affected so well by this propaganda that we're unable to take a step back often and put ourselves in the shoes of those in this situation. Let's say the Palestinians, and think of this as was America. I love the example of comparing. Let's say the Mexican government invaded Texas. I mean, a lot of Texans, they're huge patriots. They could care about their land, and let's say that they then annexed Austin, annexed part of Houston, and then disarmed the people and then started basically cutting them off from power, water. Militarily, they were occupying them. Texans would rise up. Any Texan would tell you. He would grab his gun.
Would.
And obviously, we're not advocating violence. And I share this just because that's been one of the things, I think, for people who consider themselves to be conservative, Christian, and even on the right of this paradigm that we're kind of told about, is that we're told that all those Muslims over there, specifically in the West Bank, Gaza, it's a terrorist harboring zone, and terrorists are grown there. And you think of it, just the notion of that You're absolutely right. That's absolutely racist. I mean, just to say a people are born and raised to be terrorists or to be any single thing. I mean, you replace Palestinian, Arab with anything other than that, African American, Chinese. It would be just despicable to say. Super racist, you know?
Super racist.
And you're obviously walking through this region. You were not wearing a cover, right? You were not wearing any kind of burqa, any kind of covering, right?
Only when entering mosques or any sort of religious zones, and that was even for some Christian areas. You know, there even some of like the Greek Orthodox, you have to remain fairly covered up. Walked around like an American, looking very Western. In a lot of ways.
I bring that up because we were very impressed by how industrious the area was, in the sense that there's a lot of entrepreneurs. I mean, that the Arab population there that has stayed, the Arab Palestinians who've kind of endured through this through generations, they're still trying to run businesses. They're still trying to have normal lives. They're still trying to raise families. And just, I'd say this past year, 2018, 2019, there has been an escalation in, I think, the level of persecution, in the sense that, for example, when President Trump's administration decided to withdraw aid to the UN human rights initiatives in the region, the Lutheran and other churches that were running hospitals in the region, for example, the only cancer treatment hospital, I believe, Saeb Erekat, the chief negotiator for the Palestinians, noted this in a speech at J Street, recently this year. That it was shut down, that basically the bare necessities that were existing, at least for the time period of turmoil, the stalemate that's lasted for a couple of decades, it has accelerated to the point where if you do have cancer, you want some kind of treatment, you literally may be at the point where you're leaving. And what did you experience in that regard? Meeting businessmen, and do you think that that has changed the minds of regular families, that they are now going to leave, they're going to give in a sense, to this attrition?
Yeah, I actually met several American Palestinians who were born and raised in America, but their parents had migrated from the area, and they had actually migrated back, or they're attempting to migrate back. Israel doesn't really allow migration back to the region because they're trying to get rid of Palestinians. So they don't really want Palestinians moving in. So they have these visas that are short term, and they have to constantly get their visas renewed. But I met actually several Americans Palestinians who were trying to move back and build business and try to build up the Palestinian communities. And it is really, really interesting to me how so many Palestinians, even under this intense oppression, this intense humiliation and occupation and fear, constant fear, they are trying to live, and they do largely live very normal lives. They're going out to restaurants, they're shopping, they're having fun and laughing and making friendships and raising their children and taking them to school and going to work and dreaming of business. Some of them cannot, because of the situation that they've been put in is extremely hopeless. Specifically more in the refugee camps, Gaza, for example, which I did not travel to. They make that very difficult. And there are some scenarios that are some groups of people that are the oppression is much more extreme for them than others. But it was really amazing to me how they're persevering through this. They're trying their best to make the best of this situation that has happened to them. That did just kind of happen to them. These people showed up and said, this is our claim to land from 3,000 years ago or however long ago. And they said, so it's ours and we're taking it back. And this just is something that sort of has happened to them. But, there is this sentiment. I asked several Palestinians, why don't you just leave? There was one that I'd met he's married to a German Palestinian woman, so he could get German citizenship and leave. His wife has German citizenship. His children have German citizenship. But it's if they leave, then the Israelis win. That's what the Israelis want. They're looking for them to go. So it's sort of a form of resistance to say, no, I'm going to stay and I'm going to, and also there's, in a way, the Israelis make it extremely difficult because if he were to leave and he would have to relinquish his Jerusalemite ID because they've got this crazy identification system. And I don't think he'd be able to easily come back and visit his own family in Jerusalem. The Israelis make it very difficult. So, people they're trying to resist this eradication that's clearly happening, and doing their best to try to navigate their lives.
Well,
regardless.
You mentioned the identification system, and I know a little bit about this. Obviously, when we went to carry our U.S. passports everywhere, and we were checked ourselves, and I asked a lot of people about, what does a driver's license look like here? What does any kind of identity, identifying government-issued ID look? And from my understanding, that based on where you were born, you mentioned this, I believe, in your kind of musings about what you saw there, is that there were people that are, let's say they're in a certain area B, area C, area A. If you meet someone outside this area, they could be only a couple miles from you, but you would be literally barred from leaving that area to maybe date somebody, to hang out with a friend, maybe go visit what would previously be your family's ancestral territory, your ancestral farm, based on that identification limitation. Like, in the sense that their version of a driver's license, their version of government identification, it's you're a second-class citizen compared to some others, based simply on where you were born.
Well, it goes deeper than that. They've got second-class, third-class, fourth-class citizenships based on where you're born. So it's not just Israelis have one and then Palestinians have another. It's Israelis have one and then Arab Israelis have another, and then Arab Palestinians have like a plethora of different identifications depending on where they're born. So it's extremely limiting. It is meant to hinder their freedom of movement. It is also meant to hinder their family reunification, all in an attempt, again, to make their lives very difficult to where they just want to leave. So essentially, if you're born, the highest type of Arab you could be is an Arab Palestinian born in Israel. So if you're born in Israel, you are an Israeli, you carry an Israeli passport, you have Israeli human rights, but you don't have community rights. So the Arab people in general in Israel are limited. They can't really serve in the military. And because they can't do the military, they end up with less perks and benefits. And their identification in Israel, their passport shows a number that indicates them as Arab. And then if you're born in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, you're a little bit better off than anyone else born in the West Bank. You have rights to move all throughout the region. You can go to Israel. You can go to the West Bank. You can go anywhere you want travel-wise, as long as you're carrying your papers. But you can't really leave, you can't really move out of Jerusalem. If you move out of Jerusalem, then you lose unless you're living in Israel, unless you move into the West, I get confused. I think it's the western side. It's funny because the West Bank's called the West Bank, but the West Bank's on the east.
Western Jerusalem, you could say, the western side of it.
Yeah, well, if you're going to be on the Israeli side, you can move. If you're a Jerusalemite, which is what they're called, you're able to move anywhere throughout Israel and live. People are not going to be friendly to you. You might not want to do that, but you can. You have the right to do it. You can't really, though, you don't have the right to move into the West Bank without losing your Jerusalemite identification. And if you lose that identification, then you can't travel back into Jerusalem and visit your own family. And if you're born in the West Bank, you've got another identification system. You cannot travel to Jerusalem. You cannot travel into Israel. You're very limited on where you can go. You can't use the Tel Aviv airport. You have to go to Jordan to travel anywhere. If you're going to college with some kids and you meet somebody and they're from Jerusalem and you're from Ramallah, you're going to have a very difficult time having a relationship, because you can't live, if you're the Ramallah person, you can't live in Jerusalem. You can't even visit them. And the Jerusalemite, if they move to be with you in Ramallah, they give up their Jerusalemite citizenship and they end up not even being able to visit their own parents. So they make it to where it's so difficult that the idea would be, well, you're better off taking your parents and leaving. Get your parents out. Everybody go. That's the general idea behind this very complex, difficult system.
It sounded a lot like a reservation in this sense that you leave, you basically give up any of this remaining rights to that land, that property. And I think something in that example is very interesting, because it's not simply just that if you were to leave and it makes it tough to communicate, but there is an issue with even receiving mail. And let's say you're a business owner, right? I've read that if you attempt to ship in goods, I actually experienced this firsthand. Anytime we travel anywhere for a work assignment, I send my wife a postcard, kind of as a thing we do to kind of to deal with me being away for a week. I sent a postcard to my wife from Bethlehem. That's where we were staying for our visit to the West Bank. That still hasn't arrived. I sent it in May of 2018.
Oh my gosh.
And then I remember reading in this, and you actually, I believe, had the same example. Business owners told you that they've ordered goods they've kept there for normal people. If you're an Israeli living just as a regular Israeli with full rights, full identification, full citizenship, you'll receive goods in a normal fashion in this modern economy, within a week, within a couple of weeks. I believe you were told that some people have waited up to 3 years to receive goods. Is that correct?
Yeah, the businessmen, we met with American Palestinian businessmen. So these are Americans with American citizenship, and even they're limited with what they can receive because they're Palestinian. So we met with some businessmen that said that they would order the same exact goods from the same exact vendor as maybe an Israeli businessman at the same exact time. So they're receiving the same goods, the same shipment from the same company, arriving at the same time in the same amounts. And when it gets to the port for, inspection or whatever, the Israelis will release the goods to the Israeli business within 2-3 days. But for the Palestinian business, even an American-owned Palestinian business, but it's Arab-owned, that American is an Arab, they will hold on to those goods for 2 to 3 years at times. They just barely gave 3G cell phone service to the Palestinian people last year. So they limit their access to anything that's going to help them thrive, be it from water to cell phone. They say, okay, well, you guys can own and manage your own telecom companies. Okay, great, except they manage the airwaves that the telecom companies have to tap into. They say, okay, you can manage your own water sources and set up your own infrastructure. Okay, great, except the Israelis own the water. They stole it from the Palestinian people. They annexed it, and they're selling it back to the Palestinian people, but then they won't give them the permits to build. This is the system that they've developed is this, oh, no, we're giving you all of these rights, except they're not telling you that they're controlling the basic element for that. You can set up a business in Palestine. Sure, go set up a business. But if you want to do imports or exports, good luck getting it through the Israeli customs. So everything is meant to squeeze these people to the point where they just either become terrorists, because what else are you going to do when you're feeling like your back is against the wall and somebody's got they're holding a gun to you. It, of course, is creating terrorism. It's creating violence. It's like manifesting exactly what they're then wanting, so that then when the Palestinian people do uprise and do something and violently uprise at times, the Israelis can point to them and say, see, they're animals. And that's why we have to limit them. And they are treated, make no mistake, like animals. They're not treated like human beings. They're not looked at like human beings. They are being treated and they're looked at like animals. And when you talk to some of the Israeli people, that is how they describe them. Even the ones that say they're liberal and they're for human rights and whatever, you listen to their undertone of the conversation. I spoke to, before I said anything publicly about my experience, I spoke to numerous American Jews who are supportive of the Zionist project. I spoke to numerous Israelis, and even the ones that especially American Jewish people tend to be very liberal, except when it comes to Israel. And they'll say, all of these very human rights sort of style things, but then this undertone of, but they're taught to be violent in their schools, and their families teach them this, and all of these Arab Palestinian people are these violent terrorists, and that's why they have to be limited. That's why they can't have water. I mean, does that even make sense? That's why they can't have water. I get it. Okay, because they're terrorists.
Well, it's always boggled me. Obviously, the right has the same issues. Right-left groups are still influenced heavily by inherent propaganda of the media, of influencers and politicians who have worked this narrative for about 30 or 40 years at this point. We're looking at the original annexation of land in 1948, and then now the land after the 67 war has been established to the point where now that territory is slipping out of their hands. Found the Golan Heights, for example. President Trump this past year annexed the Golan Heights, giving it rather to the Israelis, taking it finally in that sense, in his signing away of it to the Israeli government, however illegal that is. But there is word now that the Jordan Valley would be next, but to the people living there, something that's always shocked me is that there is really a second-class citizenship. And if you were to listen to our State Department, a lot of our officials in government, even on the left, as you noted, they would explain this to be a conspiracy theory, that there's the basic law that was passed last year did not create second-class citizens in the region. Are you familiar with the basic law that I'm talking about? Did they talk about that on your trip? So it was considered very controversial. It was passed through the Knesset in basically July of 2018. The short of what it was is that it created a national pride. Essentially, Israel is a Jewish state. It's Jewish in both characteristic and what it made is so that you had to be Jewish to have an identification, a citizenship in the country. The argument has been both for security, but more so that if they ever were to extend full citizenship and rights to the Arab Israelis and Arab Palestinians, that the country would quickly change. Very quickly, the Knesset, for example, would be dominated by Arab Palestinians, Arab Israelis, that they would basically be voting against the Area B, C, and A, and any of the parts of basically Jared Kushner's peace plan.
Yeah, they're not wrong. The numbers are in the Palestinians' favor. So and this is where the conundrum comes in, I guess, for the Palestinian people and their plight, is they do outnumber the Israelis, especially if they've got if the refugees come back from all of the areas that they have been sent off to or that they've run off to for their lives. So Israel would, really would cease to exist in its current form as a Jewish nation for Jews, to come to and to live. That is, it's a math equation. The numbers are just there. And so that's why they're rapidly trying to bring people in, right? They're offering all kinds of incentives to get Jewish people around the world to migrate into Israel because they're trying to change the demographics. They're trying to up their numbers so that they do eventually get to a point where they absolutely outnumber the Palestinian people. And then maybe at that point they would give them, I don't know, it's like hypothetical. Maybe if the numbers were in their favor, they would then be more open to giving the Arab Palestinians or Arab Israeli people full rights and full human rights rather than treating them like animals right now under military occupation. So maybe that would happen. But, the Arab population does have a higher birth rate. Right now, they do outnumber them in sheer numbers. So it's the Jewish population is very afraid of that outnumbering. And, I will say that when I did ask several Palestinians who want this sort of solution, what they would call this new nation, it was not Israel. So there's, now, like I said before in my previous things, I've mentioned this many times, but if you're for the ending of this sort of Jewish nation, this idea, which, and I understand that argument completely because it is fundamentally fairly racist, right? To say like, this is just an area for only one group of people and one group of people only and nobody else, right? That's fundamentally at its core. So if you're for the ending of that notion, then for sure, advocating for full rights and full integration and ending, I think is the right way to go. But if you say, well, for me, like, I don't think that's feasible. I don't think that's a real solution. I don't think the Israelis or anyone around the world who supports them is going to go for that. And I would like to see the human rights abuses end for the Palestinian people. then you kind of have to say, all right, fine, I guess you can keep a certain area of land for yourself as this Jewish nation. But what we have to work on is limiting their border, because what they're ultimately trying to do, like what you said, is they're trying to seep in further and further and further. They want to take the West Bank, which they call Judea and Samaria, and go even further. Their Judea and Samaria is where? Where does it end? When you start looking at the map of the Holy Land, you're talking all of Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, into Egypt, parts of Saudi Arabia. I mean, you're talking a giant chunk of land. And if so, maybe one conversation to have is limiting their expansion and saying, no, guys, it stops here. This is the line, and everybody else gets to be their own nation. You guys don't get to go take those nations and force those people out.
But in the sense you just presented, what's considered to be the Greater Israel Project, the original biblical borders, it would take you all the way to the Euphrates, from the Nile to the Euphrates River in Iraq. And this would obviously cause further regional wars. I mean, there's no way this land would be handed over freely. I don't think you can purchase a country in this modern day and age, nor clearly in the example of the ongoing struggles in Syria. Is it easy to just move into that territory, fund proxy forces / regular conventional forces? And then you have the issue of obviously the Iranian forces that have moved into Syria and in parts of Iraq, from reports that we've read in this past year, that you now have the issue where the other countries that would now face an existential threat from this expansion, we call it expansion, it would be a conquering of the region, essentially, right? That we would have a new war.
That's what they're doing. Well, I mean, look at the region. It is being very much destabilized, and you kind of have to ask yourselves why. And I do think that they're playing the long game. After being there, we Americans tend to think in 4-year cycles, right? We're thinking 4 years, what do we want to get done? 8 years, what do we want to get done? But nations like China, for example, think in extremely long-term periods of time. So they're playing the long game, right? Yeah, they're like, what are we going to be in 1,000 years from now? And we're going to plant the seeds now for this. And I think the Israelis are doing something very, very similar. They're thinking the long game here. They do want the entire Holy Land. They want to control that entire region. And ultimately, it's going to be a very difficult task. You've got a lot of people living in these areas, countries that do not want to give up their sovereignty. They're not going to give it up very easily. And they're starting with the Palestinians. They're starting with the Palestinian people in the West Bank. So, first they started with them because they showed up in their country, in their part of the world, and started pushing them. And I do think ultimately that their goal, maybe not in our lifetime, but they're playing the long game. They're thinking 500 years from now, we're going to own the entire region. And I think they're planting the seeds, with everything that's going on in the region, the destabilization, the funding of proxy forces to, separatist forces. So there's an argument to be made there that everybody in the region is at threat. And it's not, this notion we've got right now with Israel, Palestine of one state, two state solution. To me, that's not what's going on. It's not a one state, two state. It's an Israel versus many states that are in the region. So are we going to allow them to have one state and then everybody else gets to keep their state? So it's not a two state, it's a multi-state.
Or a no state, you're right. There's so many of these options are being put forward, and as you've reportedly noted here, some of them are infeasible at this point, in the sense that Israel, being obviously a nuclear-armed country, is not going to disappear short of a war breaking out, which would cause the country. No one would want to see that, but on the other end, there are millions of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip and West Bank who are not going to move, and as you've noted. They hold positions which either mean they want a single state, which is a Palestinian state. Some may want a two-state, but they're still asking for an autonomous state that is actually sovereign, not just sovereign in name only. And that leaves the stalemate to where it's at. I don't think they really want to give them that, because ultimately it's really clear when you're over there that the Israeli government and people are not interested in a one or a two state solution. They're interested in taking land. They're interested in expansion. That's what they're interested in. And anyone who's not part of that expansion plan is going to end up in a reservation. And very much like what we've got here in the United States. It's that they'll just this is what they're doing with their zones A, B, and C.
So they've got these zones throughout the West Bank that if you're in an urban center, it's zone A, which is the very center of towns. It's not much. The suburban areas are considered area B, and then everything, the rural areas and many villages are in area C throughout the West Bank. And Israel controls completely area C. Areas B is considered joint control between the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis. And then Area A, they say, okay, that's Palestinian. When you look at that, it's very clear that they're creating reservations. And they're saying, okay, you guys can control yourselves in Area A, but we're going to do joint control in these outer skirt area just to make sure that there's nothing bad that happens or crime or whatever. And then Area C, we're completely controlling. That's what the United States is with Native American reservations. So it's very clear that that's what they're creating. And if that is, if they do end up with, which I do think is ultimately the plan, because when you talk to them, they say Judea and Samaria. Well, where's Judea and Samaria? That's this whole, it expands. So if you look at it that way, then maybe they would try to create pockets of reservations for the Syrian people. And it's like, okay, well, if you're Syrian Arab, then you've got to, live in this little area A that we've carved out, but we control the rest of the region and we're creating these little reservations. That's their ultimate solution. You're
absolutely correct. I mean, it's a form of geopolitical gentrification in the sense that they're creating these communities that are not sustainable. They don't have inherent resources. They are cut off from the centers of both power and commerce. And it's almost like they took a note from the British who brought a magic marker to the region and started to cut out countries, both in the Middle East and in Africa. And most of these colonialist ideas, most would consider to have been basically something we left in the past. But it's being resurrected, in apparent, if we are going to either support or not say anything about this plan of expansion, which is clear as day. Now, that's something I've wondered about for quite some time. If you study history in America, there was an anti-war movement in the 70s and 80s, and in the 60s, specifically with the Vietnam War. There was an anti-war movement. There was a call that maybe American soldiers should not go off to fight in foreign lands if it has no interest to the public. That seems to have disappeared. And as someone who isn't, I know you don't consider yourself on the left, but maybe you consider yourself a progressive, or maybe it has a lot of people who consider themselves, self-identify as Democrats or on the left. Where is the anti-war movement?
It's really interesting. I'm a big supporter of Tulsi Gabbard. She's an anti-war candidate. And even last night, I actually went to her event. She's here in town right now, and she's got an event tonight she's got several events going on. And it's interesting. The mix of people that show up to these events are people on both, it's right and left and independents. And so I don't know where the anti-war movement will fall, because I do feel like there's so many Americans on all sides of the spectrum that are interested in ending these endless, wasteful wars that we've got going on that really are just based in greed and, based in selling weapons and more weapons and more weapons. We keep this. One of the things is you think about this Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what motivation do they have to end this and to come to a peace agreement when we're selling so many of our weapons to Israel? You need to, in order to justify the sale of so many weapons, you've got to have conflict, right? I mean, in peace times, do you need that many weapons? So we keep these conflicts going so that, because, military companies have no desire, like any business that operates, to cut revenue. They're not like thinking, okay, this year, let's just lower our revenue. We don't need as much revenue. Nobody says that in business. Everybody's trying to increase their revenue. They're trying to increase their profit margins. And that's a problem when your business is war.
Well, it's so interesting. You bring up the question, basically, the issue of weapon exports. I don't know this, but the deal we have specifically with Israel, we give them military aid, but the deal is they have to buy from American companies.
Yeah.
And I also think it's like, first of all, war is not a business. I make this very clear to anyone watching this. War is not a business. It leaves countless lives destroyed. It could destroy your life if you're involved in it. And just look at the state of our current military and our veterans at that. How many have come back from war and have been damaged to the point they can't maintain a family? They've had issues basically haunting, issues with PTSD and these other things, injuries that were both physical and mental that can be seen and unseen. But then past that, the countries themselves, the wasteland we leave behind. But you think about this. in order for this to continue, we basically would have to cut off a good portion of the military-industrial complex, a good portion of military companies and corporations producing missiles, ammunition, even, let's say, medical supplies, anti-air defense systems, missile defense systems. All of this has created such an incredibly strong industry in this country, this, in a sense now a foreign lobby, because it's also now been expanded to the argument to why we would support and continue to cover for countries like Saudi Arabia. But something I've always wondered with this is that obviously Tulsi Gabbard, it's a candidate we've watched very close. I've watched very closely in the sense that she was a veteran. She came from basically the war on terrorism era and came out of it not in support of that war anymore, and can speak to both sides. But she's gotten attacked for being, quote, isolationist, being someone who, what was the ridiculous trope they threw at her recently, that she's an asset, an agent of the Russians for daring to hold a position, When do you think that this has become so systemic, so intolerable, that it will overcome the paradigm? Or do you think a candidate like Tulsi Gabbard will be cut out of the system as an example of how the empire plans to carry on for this next election?
Yeah, it's looking like the empire is always, is strong and winning in a lot of ways. And what's really disheartening is to see this woman of color. She's like all of these things that the Democratic Party claims that they're wanting in their candidate, right? They want the minority, the woman, the young, and she's religious minority, all of these various different things. And she's a vet. She's served 2 tours, and still is a major in the Hawaii National Guard, still doing her service. And they just come out. Both sides will come out and give her, and just try to run her off. For saying, look, this is ridiculous. What are we doing? We shouldn't be out here destroying families, destroying regions, destroying lives. And, I don't know if, I have hope that we're going to be able to overcome this, that the more people we help wake up, which is what I try to do on my show, is to just say, wake up, guys. The narratives we're hearing are not accurate. They were not accurate with my own family, and I'm Vietnamese. My country, my family was destroyed by war, torn apart. I had, because of the war over there, an uncle fighting for the North, an uncle fighting for the South, and an American uncle fighting for the Americans. And my family ended up having to migrate, they fled, they're refugees, came here to the United States, but half of my family had to stay behind. One of my uncles did not survive the war. And my family dreamt of going back. They dreamt of returning. And a lot of that was, you look back at that and you wonder, what were we doing there? What was America doing there? Why to defeat Russia? It was all because of Russia. And we're doing this again, right? We're all Russia. Russia's the boogeyman. We have to maintain a boogeyman in order for the military-industrial complex to continue to justify their increased budgets and increased selling of weapons. And and then now we've got China, and we continue to demonize the Arab world and to go over there and massacre them and turn and the Israeli narrative of they're all terrorists. I don't know if I keep hoping it's going to end, but like you mentioned, there was an anti-war movement, McGovern. But look at what happened to McGovern when he ran against Nixon. Democrats came out and said, Democrats for Nixon. The guy only won 1 or 2 states. They just smeared him. They didn't want him around. There's just too much money involved, and money, greed, that unfortunately rules the world. It is the evil that is taking over the world, and we have to combat that greed somehow. And to tell people, how many yachts do you need? How much money do you really need to be happy? But it all comes down to money. With the Israeli situation, and I don't think people know this, we do give them a ton of money, and then we do require them to spend 75% of that back on military weapons. So we give them our tax dollars, and then we tell them with these tax dollars that come out of you and me that they've then got to buy from these private military companies. So we help these military companies, these weapons industry, make a bunch of money with our tax dollars. So we're just funneling our tax dollars back into the military-industrial complex.
That's ridiculous, and in a sense, a very futile exercise of our sovereign power in this country. Ms. Iversen, it's well put, and I appreciate, again, coming on the program. I want to give you the last word to anyone who's watching this, who might consider themselves still inside one of these paradigms. But you want them to reconsider both their position and how they look at the Palestinians and don't see them maybe as people, don't see these issues as issues that they need to be involved in. And secondly, they also believe in the military-industrial complex. What would you say to them?
Oh, gosh. I would say, first of all, when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, just go. Go see it for yourself. Before you can have an opinion on, it's one thing to remain neutral because you don't know. But if you're going to take a staunch position that you believe in the Zionist project of expansion and you believe that these Palestinian people are just terrorists, if you're going to take an opinion like that, then you need to go there first and see for yourself and have dinner with these people and stay in their hotels and shop in their towns and visit and travel around and see for yourself. No one needs to tell you a story. No one needs to propagandize you. You don't need to hear a single story from anyone. All you have to do is travel around and open your eyes because it's in your face, it's apparent, and your opinion. I don't know anybody, and I would challenge somebody. I don't know anyone who has been there truly amongst Palestinian people, eating with Palestinian people, traveling around with Palestinian people, who has come back and said, yep, they're terrorists and they deserve what they're getting. I don't know of a single person. Every person I know, be they Christian or agnostic or even Jewish, if they have been over there, they come back disgusted at what is happening to these people. And I think anybody that goes to war or war zones and that truly sees the impact that it has on civilian lives, like with the Vietnam War, what it's had, the impact it's had on my own family and myself, I think then, people start to, when it's personal and it starts to affect you really, then people start to change their minds. And of course, I don't wish for people to be victims of war, but we just have to ask ourselves, what's the most important thing in our lives? What's the most important thing? And to me, life and death and this war and murdering of children. And I mean, that we've just got to say, is this really the nation we want? Is this what our great grandparents and our grandparents wanted for this great nation? And I just don't think it's what they envisioned. I think they'd be disgusted by what they're seeing today. This isn't what we stand for, is it? I really hope not.
I'm with you in your frustration, and very well put, Ms. Iversen. I appreciate you, again, coming on the program to share your point of view of what you saw.
Thank you.
I actually saw, because you visited, you were there. You saw the children, you saw the poverty, you saw the troubles of the people, and it changed you. It changed me, too, from going to see that. Thank you again, Ms. Iversen, for joining us here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, welcome back to the Godcast. Edward, we've just finished this interview. Tell me, what was your biggest takeaway with your conversation with Kim Iversen?
We can have an honest conversation about injustice with people who aren't politically aligned to us, either on paper or how we're being told we're politically aligned. That really, we need to be guided by the truth, especially in our discussions and as Christians, how we evangelize to those around us.
Right. So I hope you have enjoyed this interview today. And of course, this is a holiday week for a lot of people. I want to encourage you to continue to pray for us and continue to financially support us so we can have great interviews like you just heard from Edward here. So I want to encourage you to write us and let us know. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see all the different ways that you can watch Trunews and be able to interact with Trunews. We're on Roku, we're on Apple TV, we're on all these different platforms. But I also want to encourage you to write us and let us know that this ministry has been a blessing in your life. Would you write us a letter and let us know that you appreciate the kind of content that you're watching and hearing here on True News? The best way is to write us at True News, P.O. Box 690069, Vero Beach, Florida 32969. That's True News, P.O. Box 690069, Vero Beach, Florida 32969. Even available today here on Thanksgiving Day. You can call us at 800-576-2116. That's 800-576-2116. And as always, if you visit the Trunews.com website, that's one of the best ways that you can help support this ministry financially. Look for the heart button or the donate button on either side of the web page, and that'll take you to our donate page where you can make that monthly commitment of financial support. Now, if you're on the Trunews.com website, you're going to see a banner on that page. It's for Rick's new book called Final Day. Final Day is coming out here in just a few short weeks, right after the first of the year. What we're doing right now is we're taking pre-orders for his book. And if you click on that banner on the Trunews.com website, it'll take you to the page where you can pre-order Rick's book. That'll be coming out here in just a few more weeks. Now, you'll be one of the first to receive a copy of this new book, Final Day. I've had a little bit of a preview of the book. I'm telling you, he is going to rock your world with some of the stuff that's in that coming book called Final Day. You won't want to miss it. So if you've been a longtime friend and supporter of this ministry, here at the end of the year here, that's a great opportunity for you to show your love and support by clicking on that banner, Final Day, and getting your copy of Rick's new book reserved for you. And why not reserve one for a family member or a friend or even an enemy? Give them a copy, okay? And just bless them with it. Well, on behalf of Edward Zoll and on Rick Wiles, we want to encourage you to have a very happy Thanksgiving Day today. Let us know that we've heard from you. Write us, call us, email us, and let us know that we're a blessing in your life. We'll be back here again tomorrow on the next edition of True News.
God bless you.